Take two. Folks, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show, joined by a phenomenal drummer and amazing human being, Tony Braunagel. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. So the idea here is a lot of musicians want to be athletes and vice versa. Athletes want to be musicians. When did you pick up on being an actor?
I did a little acting in high school. It was fun. I played some funny parts, and I kind of got the bug back then, but I never thought I would ever pursue it. And then I was working with Jim Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and the Blues Brothers, and Jim got an opportunity to do this sitcom, and he wanted some of the band members to be in his garage scene with his band, and he wanted some real musicians and not just actors, and the casting people, the producers decided, now we want all actors. And Jim said, I need at least one musician there. So I was the guy who they liked the most when they saw me on the show, and they asked me to go read for it. I read for the part. Somehow, a week later, I was signing my way on to doing the show for 8 years, and I was the drummer in the garage band. And my name was Tony in the script as well. So it wasn't a big reach, really.
But you've continued to do some acting as well. I mean, in recent times.
No, I mean I still go for auditions and stuff for commercials and small parts.
Really? Know? I mean, yeah. What is your niche? I mean, are you like? I
don't know. I've got white hair and I don't look like a regular insurance salesman or accountant or anything. So I'm not going to be some kind of a hunk, but maybe some kind of an odd. We're not
going to see on the soap opera circuit per se, but I mean,
I don't think so.
I mean, can you talk about how you over time developed humor in your playing? Humor's very important. I mean, a lot of younger cats. Tom Scott's like, yo, smile, but
yeah.
Humor in music. Can you talk about how?
I grew up with some funny people, and my best friend Willie Ornelas, who taught me how to play drums. Wow, he got me started. Sold me my first drum kit. He probably cringes if I say he taught me. In fact, I cringe. No. Hi, Willie, if you're watching.
He's watching.
Yeah. So anyhow, we go back, we go back to childhood, and there's always been a sense of humor. There's always been a sense of always moving on each other, jacking with each other, messing with each other, and with other people around us. And we both developed a sense of humor pretty early, I think, doing that. And Willie's sense of humor rubbed off on me, and hopefully mine rubs off on other people. And at this late day and age that we are at, not late, but this day and age that we're at, we still constantly mess with each other in a very, humorous but low down way,
Musically, how did you incorporate humor into your playing?
I don't know that I've done that. I think you just have to. You should smile. I think when you're playing, you shouldn't be sitting there thinking about why your car isn't working or how to pay your bills or whatever. When you're playing, you should be pushing something else out to the audience. I mean, when you look at the energy of someone, when you start playing a beat, and somebody in the room starts to move just a little bit, you've got a power, and you're doing something good. So you take that power and try to throw something good out there into the universe. Not to get all whatever about
That's what the Jake Feinberg Show is about. Yeah. Tony, the music that you came up on, I want you to talk about this a little bit, because you've been immersed in the scene for quite a while. The music that you grew up on, specifically the early Motown stuff, the bass and the drums were used as a counterpoint to the vocals. And in rock music over time, especially in the 70s and into the 80s, kind of got away from that. I'm talking about Jamerson, talking about those guys that played counterpoint to the vocals. And I want you to talk about those rhythms, if you agree with that, and how you interpret that, and why we got away from that, because no longer the counterpoint to that is what, in my mind, is what made that music swing. But I want you to talk about it.
Well, what I gather from what you're saying here is that you have an artist like James Jamerson, who played incredible bass. He was a virtuoso. He was having a conversation with the song.
That exactly.
And the singer, and the song itself, and the lyrics, and the other musicians. When he was playing, his groove was impeccable, but he was putting a melody to that when he was playing, and that's how I interpret that. The drummers of Motown, Benjamin, and the other cats, all had this great groove and all those signature fills that we know, and that wonderful bright high mid-range sound that ringing mid-range sound that came out of Motown that didn't come out of anywhere else. It was kind of like a jazz tuning recorded really well. That's my interpretation of it. And it was necessary for that to happen because really anytime people are playing together anyhow, really playing together, and I still do a lot of live sessions and a lot of live work where we're all playing at the same time. We don't go in the studio, I lay down the drums, the bass player comes and plays. No, we learn the song, we all play at the same time. There's a conversation and a synergy that goes on there that doesn't happen when you put everything on separately. A lot of modern music is made the other way, but call me old-fashioned, old school, but I'll remain that way because I think that's the best way to do it, and that's the interpretation of a James Jamerson playing with everybody else.
Can you talk about the influence that I remember Ron Tutt talking about reggae being the most important contribution to rock music when it first came in, and it was humbling for him to learn it. Can you talk about the early reggae records that either you were hip to or got off on, and how it influenced traditional blues and rock music?
Well, the first stuff I got was someone made a cassette of some reggae records and sent it to me in the mail. A friend of mine. That's how I got my.
It was a mixtape.
It was a mix. It was a bit, and all the Desmond Decker and Early Marley and Jimmy Cliff and on and on and on. I can't remember all the names right now of all the early cats and some of the really early gangster reggae that came out of Kingston and whatnot. And that's what I learned to play from. Toots in the Maytals, one of my favorites still to this day. I mean, his stuff was always lively and happy, I don't know how much it influenced rock. It came to me at a period when I needed something new because I grew up on rhythm and blues, and I was kind of reaching out into the rock bands thing a little bit more with the bands I was in, just because of the youthful period I was in. That was more happening, but we were still blues based. Then when the reggae thing came in, I went, wow, this is a cool new challenge, and it's based on something simple and more folkloric, and it's a tradition from a place, from Jamaica, and I really enjoyed learning to play that, and got a chance to play with Johnny Nash for a couple of years, and sometimes on the road and in the studio, and so I honed my reggae chops then. I still love to play it. But
is there a way to show the audience about how you incorporate the reggae rhythms into, like, the Johnny Nash tune or more traditional R&B and the reggae guys got their music from country and rhythm and blues radio because that's what bounced on the waves over to Jamaica. So they listened to Southern R&B and country radio. That's how they got all that. Somehow they fused the two together. On top of that, a lot of Jamaican singers are crooners, so the vocal is in that crooner range. And can you croon for us?
No, you don't want to hear me croon.
So they're crooners.
Right, yeah. Right.
Oh, I love it.
So the rhythms were very simple, basically, and they leave a lot of space. And when if I were to play a reggae rhythm, simple rhythm for you, and then just go to its maybe rock or R&B counterpoint, you'll see that it's going to feel the same way, but the space is going to be a little bit different.
I'd love to see it. Subtle, but there.
Yes. There's my friend Gita. Say hi to Gita.
Hi, Gita.
We're Facebook Live right now.
Yeah,
it's okay.
I want we were talking off air. Can you talk about this Nashville scene and how, talking to the worldwide audience, how they can become more broad-minded about how to stretch the music out?
Well, they have somewhat already, because it's kind of turned to Nashville. The country music kind of turned into rock music that was taken away from adults 20 years ago. It kind of turned into Southern California rock a little bit in some ways. And then now it's gone very pop, and it's allowed within that dome or area that you live in Nashville musically, and I hate to just shove everybody into that category, but it started as a songwriting community more, or it is more of a songwriting community, and I really respect that they keep that root, and that's their tradition and everything. So that, I think that sort of grounds the Nashville scene a little bit, because they still go for all the songwriters and they still go for the composition. Other musical capitals in the world aren't quite so stuck into that, and Nashville still holds on to some of its roots. But even Nashville's roots have been changed quite a lot, and the real modern country is not very country as I know it.
Do you? I mean, as far as them expanding out, there's not a lot of. We've talked about this many times before about regional sound, but because there's so much money there now, and because that's a factory, is there a way to spread that out across the country, make it more broad-minded?
Jake, I'm gonna be positive and think that it's probably already happening.
But have you seen it, or you just
what I've seen is a lot of young people go to Nashville because it's because of its status as a musical capital in the United States, which it always has been with New York, Los Angeles, and even Chicago in some respects, and then later on, say, Miami, and then as the Seattle scene happened, and the Portland and Austin scenes happen. I would say that it's probably because young people have gone there to try to get into the Nashville scene, whether it was to play country, or whether it was to be a songwriter, whether it was to find themselves or whatever. And I see some of them leave there and go out with a new influence.
There you go.
So there is a new influx of energy that's gone to Nashville and developed and moved to other parts of the country.
When you talk, like, you were with Bluntz, you went to New York for a hot minute, but I mean, LA became a very safe studio place. It became very slick and became very safe in the 70s, and you bounced to England. Did you get tired of the slickness of the scene? I mean, it was that one reason you bounced out, because you went to a very open, elastic scene in England.
True, that was really changing with pop and then new wave.
That's right, new wave. That's right.
I was right there with not pop, with punk and new wave. And I mean, I lived on Kings Road, 2 doors down from the Malcolm McLaren's sex shop where the Sex Pistols started. That was going on in London. Back up, I went there because I was offered an opportunity to go work with Island artists and work kind of indirectly for Island Records. I wasn't in a record company executive or employee, but I did work for Island Records. And I took that opportunity because I thought that might be more intriguing and more developmental for me to take that, something completely different, than moving to Los Angeles, which is what I was about to do in that 1973-74 period. I went to London instead. And I had a great time. I had 5 years, and I learned a lot more. That I learned more in London than I missed in Los Angeles, if that makes any sense.
Well, let's break that down. What did you learn? And
just
specifically,
another way of recording, another way of doing things that I didn't grow up with. Just an openness to certain things, that a way of miking things and getting sounds and everything. I had a different way. I mean, first of all, they're on a different voltage system, and I didn't really think about that until I went there and realized that voltage affects the microphones and the way of recording to tape much more than I thought about until I came back to the United States, and I could then, honestly, organically, feel the difference.
In your mind, it's about making the body dance. What do you think about, or how have we gotten to this point now where, I know you're not a stone jazz, you don't consider yourself a stone jazz player, you can play jazz.
Not at all. I can fake it.
But when did it start going from the idea of dance music, just music in general, to staring at people's facility? How did we get to that point where people are now sitting and staring at people's chops?
Wow, that's a good question. Hard to answer.
I mean, when you play gigs now, yeah.
In rock and roll, probably. All right, let me just off the top of my head say that when rock and roll came in, and people's consciousness changed, why they went to concerts, and they got more into the music, maybe because it was chemical.
Yep.
And the atmosphere of that got everybody. Oh, look how great that guitar player is, or look how cute that lead singer is when he moves, whatever. People kind of focused on individual talents a little bit more. And then I think that consciousness kind of spilled over into every other instrument on stage. You know, you can go to the bass thing and you see like all these incredible bass players, and yet there are tons of fans there to watch all these great, you know, incredible players. And same with drummers. You go to see your favorite drummers, and you actually go to watch them and see their chops. And you know, it's kind of like going to a bullfight or a sword fight or whatever. You go to be entertained by their expertise. You know what I mean?
Were you going to those clubs when those security guards in Houston were saying, just sit back there and don't control the payphones? I mean, were you going to study technique, or were you...
I was going to listen to music, man. I was going to listen to music, and of course I focused on the
And your
drum.
ears were huge.
Yeah, probably helped me develop the ears that I have, you know, by going and listening to music at an early age like that. And I took all this music in, and it's still in there. It's still in there. You know, I can sit down today and just go right there in a second. I can go into a conversation with my best friends that grew up the same way, and we go right straight back to that same place. I can get in the studio with like-minded guys that I've played with for years, like the Phantom Blues Band and people like that. And we get in the studio and we talk about something, we sit down and we play it. One take, maybe two takes.
What is it about that one how did you learn? You didn't have time to do 40 take to get the drum sound right. I mean, or you didn't care at that when you were younger? Because nowadays,
No,
I mean,
no,
like
I
Lee Sklar go to a session, and it takes 40 minutes just for the techs and the engineers to get the drum to sound right. You guys are like, let's just hit it. I mean, it's more of a Miles sort of Wayne Shorter concept.
Well, if I go into a studio that I don't work in all the time, it takes a while to get a drum sound. I hopefully take the kind of drums in there and bring the type of sounds that it's easy for an engineer to record. That's my forethought before I play one note, is if I got the right sound set up here, when I tune my drums and I bring the right snares and the right types of cymbals for the kind of music that I'm going to make that day, then I will change my cymbals according to the tracks, the dynamics, the color of the tracks, and I'll change my snare drums according to how that snare drum feels in that track with everything else, and whether it's a pace, a color, a key, or how does it fit to the vocal. All of those things are taken into consideration when I sit down to play in the studio. I don't just go, this is fine, and play it. And a lot of guys will take one or two snare drums in the studio and maybe change the pitch a little bit and get that and do well with that. But I'm a little bit more neurotic about that, I guess. I really like to dial it in so that when that music is mixed, my drums sound a certain way because I've brought that sound to the studio.
When you, like, I was just listening to this interview with Pete Townsend, and he was talking that it was back in like the early 80s, and The Who had been playing the same show for 4 years, okay? Do you remember, did you have a time in your career when you were on tour? Because that's a burn. I mean, that's a burn. Play the same thing, the formula trip. Have you been part of the formula trip before?
I've had to do that where you play the same song the same way every night. You play the same show.
And Bonnie, like for instance, like Bonnie Raitt's not like. Is she like that or no? Like
Bonnie likes to hear you play the way her records sound if you can, and you get close to that as you can. Then after a while, even Bonnie or anyone who tries to present their record live to people, because there is a responsibility with that. Even she will loosen up on it and go, well, we've been doing this song so long this way. Let's kind of change it up a little bit to make it fresh. You know, with Taj Mahal, I don't even have to think about that. We play the same basic arrangement, but every night we're all going to have a little bit of different attitude about it, depending on whether we rode all night on the bus, whether we ate something we enjoyed, whether we got a lot of rest, or whether we're in a bad mood, or if the place, you know, the club or the venue wasn't good. So all these things can affect you when you're doing it live over and over and over. When I played with Bette Midler, we did the same show every night, as close to exact as possible.
And how do you stay? I asked Tut this question with Neil Diamond. How, as a drummer, with your own heartbeat, how do you stay stimulated? I mean, you're getting a paycheck. I dig, but
you got to remember that at the end of the day, you have a job that you're getting paid for, and the job at hand is to do.
But we're all mavericks. I mean, how do you stay at the straight and narrow?
You have to discipline yourself, and that's what being a professional musician is.
How have you? Can you talk about one thing that you've really been able to that you didn't always have discipline in that you've been honing and cultivating over the last 20, 30, 40 years?
Oh, I can't pinpoint. I mean, I'm always hearing things that I play live that I go, I didn't play that as good as I wanted to play it. I better work on that. And I'll come back here and sit down and I'll, pull up a metronome or something, some timekeeper, and I'll play some exercises around that to warm myself into that, and I'll try to work on that thing if I was having a problem articulating it. So, I still do that to this day. I'm not without trying to grow.
Before I let you go, we gotta go grab some Thai food with Gradney. Can you just humor me and show me what the Ghanaians taught you?
Oh, one of my favorite beats. One of my favorite beats.
Just for the record, you met them when you went to Island Records in England.
I met them.
Johnny Nash. With Johnny Nash.
I met with Johnny Nash in '73, and was on the road. And while I was on the road with them, they would grab me at sound check. The 4 Ghanaians that were in the band, 3 of them were horn players, and 1 was a percussionist. And they would grab me and say, "Tony, don't go anywhere after sound check. We want to show you something." So they would sit down and they would hammer this stuff into me. And I still love this beat, and I hear it played different variations to this day from African bands.
Well, we'll be back later with more Tony Braunagel. Until then, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Peace.